canceled
Yes.
events.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, the CBT is next Wednesday.
Oh, thank you, Marilyn.
I didn't think it was canceled, so.
Oh, good. Well, maybe I'll be able to get out my driveway by then.
Right.
Yeah, it's from 2 to 6 next Wednesday.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. And then we had.
Good morning, everyone. It's 10:01, so we're starting a little bit behind. My name is Daniel Sayon, the Chief Administrative Officer for the ACRD. And given that this is the first West Coast Committee meeting of the year, I am going to start by opening the meeting prior to the election of a chair. So I'm going to call the meeting to order at 10:01. I do want to recognize that we are conducting our meeting here on the traditional territories of the Tshut and Huipetchesed, and also recognize that given that only staff are in the boardroom, that we are coming from a wide array of different areas and regions, and do want to recognize and give our appreciation for the territories that we are operating on. A notice to participants that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube and is available on the Regional District website. And at this time, I will turn over the meeting to our General Manager of Administrative Services to conduct the election of Chair and Vice Chair for the Electoral Area for the West Coast Committee for 2023. Wendy.
Thank you. Before I get started, we have the fire department here. Just has to do a test of our alarm. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and I'll do that. Okay, thank you. Great. So I will conduct the election of Chair and Vice Chair for the West Coast Committee for 2023. As our meetings are now held hybrid, those that are on Zoom, if you could please, if there's an election, email me your vote. And if there was anyone in the room today, we would hand out ballots, but everyone's participating by Zoom today. So it will be emailed to myself if there's an election. Great. So I will call for nominations for Chair of the West Coast Committee for 2023 a first time.
I'll nominate Tom Steer.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Director Steer, do you accept that nomination?
Yes, I do.
Great. Thank you. And I will call for nominations for Chair of the West Coast Committee for 2023 a second time. And I will call for nominations for the West Coast Committee for 2023 for Chair a third time. Great. There being no further nominations, I'd like to congratulate Tom Steer as Chair of the West Coast Committee. Congratulations. So I'll continue on to do election of Vice Chair. So I'll call for nominations for Vice Chair of the West Coast Committee for 2023 a first time.
Maybe I'll nominate Marilyn McEwen.
Thank you. Director McEwen, do you accept that nomination?
I do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I will call for nominations a second time for Vice Chair of the West Coast Committee for 2023. And I will call a third time for nominations for Vice Chair of the West Coast Committee for 2023. Okay, there being no further nominations, I'd like to congratulate Director McEwen as Vice Chair of the West Coast Committee for 2023. Congratulations. So I'll pass the chair over to you, Director Steer.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to welcome everyone, some new faces and some and old, not age related, but thank you, Kirsten. And just wanted to acknowledge that I am coming from Tloquet First Nation territory, and acknowledge that many in the room along this peninsula are coming from various territories, and I'd like to make that acknowledgement here. We'll start off with the approval of the agenda. And I do have an addition to the agenda that I would like to I think we can put it under late business, and I'm going to look to Wendy. I believe that would be okay. It is it would be a notice of motion that I'd like to bring forward. Is that acceptable under late business, Wendy?
Yes, it is. Yeah, if you can include the reason and under approval of the agenda for this late item, that's a great place for it to be discussed.
Yes, it'll be to bring forward a notice of motion regarding a governance structure from the board of directors, from our West Coast Committee to the board of directors around developing a plan for advancing inclusive governance within the formal board governance structures of the ACRD. And if it needs a 2/3 majority for that, so if that is acceptable, I'll call the question now for approval of the agenda. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Thank you. So then could I then have an approval of the agenda for the amended agenda for our meeting today? Thank you, Director.
Second.
And seconded by, was it Kirsten? Ms. Johnson. Thank you. With approval of agenda, all those in favor? Great, motion carried. I'll move from the chair that the minutes of the West Coast Committee meeting held on December 7th, 2022 be received. Thank you for seconding, Director Siga. All in favor? Wonderful, motion carried. Agenda item number 5. Now we're on request for decisions. A request for decisions regarding the annual West Coast Committee terms of reference. I'm not sure who will speak to that, but I'll look to the boardroom there. And thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. So very quickly, at the first meeting of our regional district committees each year, we review our terms of reference for each of our committees. So submitted for consideration of the West Coast Committee is their annual terms of reference review. And if there's any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Seeing no questions, is there someone would like, oh, sorry, Director Siga, go ahead, please.
I'd like to move that the West Coast Committee reconfirm the terms of reference for 2023 as presented.
We have a seconder. Thank you, Director Johnson. All in favor? Wonderful. Motion carried. I don't think there was any debate to be had on that one. We'll move on to item number 5B. Request for decision is regarding our financial plan, and I'm going to probably look to Terry for this one, if there is a report to be included in this.
Right. Oh, I'm just trying to figure out where to sit. Okay, so good morning. What we'll do today is we'll just go through each section of the West Coast Services reader part of the financial plan. And so we'll look to each one separately. We'll start with the Long Beach Airport, moving on to West Coast Emergency Coordination, etc. And so each of us will provide, or the manager in charge will provide an overview of the service, just as a brief reminder, and then we'll look for any questions. And once the discussion is finished, if we could just have a motion to either amend the draft plan or include it in the first reading of the plan, that would be great. So we'll start with the Long Beach Airport, and I will do a screen share, and Jenny will run you through it.
Oh, screen share. Okay.
Thanks very much, Terry. So the Long Beach Airport is an excellent service that we operate on the West Coast. It is a large airport from that the ACRD took over in 2000. This was an old military airport. As such, we have a lot of infrastructure that we take care of there, and a lot of it is very aged infrastructure. However, we have 3 runways. The primary one is currently cleared of snow and operating regardless of weather conditions, which is excellent. We also have many aprons, taxiways, lighting. We have a number of old buildings from the military, and we have a terminal building as well, and water systems and septic systems and multiple sets of equipment that we operate there. So we're proposing a $75,000 increase in tax requisition, and this will be an annual increase. The intent is to really close the asset management funding gap that we have been seeing for a long time. The benefit of adding to our own capital reserve is that we've been extremely successful with our grant programs over the last few years. Like even for 2022, we've gotten money for the fire suppression upgrades. So that was a large water main upgrade. We're going to be applying for a pump station upgrade. We were successful with a winter maintenance equipment building. However, we did not have adequate funding to do our portion of financing. The catch on that one is that the tender pricing came in significantly higher than expected. So we weren't expecting to have to put up the difference anyhow. However, as more grants come available, it's going to be extremely important that we have money so that we can pay our portion of the grant. And it really allows us to leverage the money that's available and deal with all of this aging infrastructure. The other issue is that, this is we have scheduled service at this building. We see increased passenger numbers. And so it is a challenge because we also have increased operational staffing needs and the safety requirements are continuing to increase. So we need to make sure that we are running this to meet our Transport Canada regulations, allowing for not just travel, but also medevac. The other key project that we are currently underway with is the airport terminal fencing. So we received $3 million and that project is underway at the moment with anticipated completion in March. And that was 100% grant funded, which is excellent. We are looking to do a airport terminal building upgrade. We need basically a conceptual plan on how we're going to meet the increased growth and needs for just the passengers and the traffic that we see at the airport. The other key planning item that we have coming up is going to be a land use management plan. Terry, I think we have another slide as well on this one. Yeah, so I was speaking a bit about that. So we're going to be focusing shortly. So we're looking at bringing on an airport projects coordinator within the next couple months. That position will be leading the land use and development plan, as well as assisting us as we work on our partnership with Tloquet First Nation, which is a key component of, thoughtful and productive visioning for all of the community members, as well as taking into consideration that this is the traditional territory of Tloquet Nation there. We also have grant applications submitted for the loader and snowblower. We have a strategic priorities grant submitted for doing a wastewater upgrade. And we are looking at development of land adjacent to Apron 2, and that's to support expanded lease lots for air-related activities because we are running out of airside lots. So we have a number of big projects and a lot of work on the go in this service. I'm happy to answer any questions on the financial side of things as well.
I'd just like to add, so Jenny spoke about the 75,000 that we've increased from a infrastructure part, but we've also used the $110,000 from West Coast Transit that we in the last couple of years have requisitioned for West Coast Transit. And we're using that funding as well to support this service this year. Obviously, if transit comes online again, it will have huge cost implications, but that's unknown at this point. And we really needed that funding to help fund this land use and visioning plan. So we had some remaining funding or some residual funding from the COVID grants that we received, but we were also needing that extra amount. So that overall won't have a tax impact to the taxpayers because the requisition for transit will go down at the same time as the one for Long Beach Airport is going up. However, the overall increase for this service is actually $197,000 this year. And as we look for that longer term and opportunities for revenue, it's really that land use plan that is the next step in getting there. And I will stop sharing my screen so it's easier to see.
Great. Thank you, Jenny and Terry. Are there any questions at this time for either Jenny or Terry? Or comments for that matter? Director McEwen, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just through the chair to staff, if BC Transit does happen to come back to the table, will the money be transferred back from the airport budget or do we start all over again?
Excellent question, because our plan is only to do this for the 2023 year. So we will talk a bit more about the West Coast Transit Service, but we are in the process of doing that feasibility study to look at what will the transit service look like. And for this 1 year until we get a plan and a decision on the next steps, we decided not to reduce or remove that tax requisition, but we didn't want to put it into a service that didn't have a clear plan. So we're reallocating it for the Long Beach Airport just for this 1 year. So you can see that the 2024 budget, it drops significantly the tax requisition again. So thanks for clarity.
Okay, thank you.
And can I just add that we actually haven't transferred from service to service because we can't do that, but because we have an offsetting in a different service, an amount of the equal amount, they will offset each other on your property tax notice, but we have not moved money that was requisitioned in transit over to Long Beach Airport, just for clarity.
Any other questions for Terry or Jenny? I have a comment, just if there are no other comment. I just wanted to point out, thank you once again, Terry and Jenny, and specifically Terry on the presentation of the budgets. They are incredibly accessible, easy to follow, and laid out in a way that I really just wanted to thank you for the work and effort that goes into the creation of that. And specifically around the airport, we know the cost of running a regional airport is significant, and our long-term planning process will be critical in sustaining that. So I'm glad to see that it's in our key project area. We've committed the funding for that, and we're well on our way to do that. And recognizing that we will need the additional resources in terms of those staffing. So that's another critical component that's been identified and been funded for. So I just want to thank staff once again for moving forward. And I'm very supportive on from an asset management perspective on that $75,000. And I was just curious in terms of my one question, how is that particular number identified? And I know we want to be cognizant of tax increases and in the short term, and how that figure was, how we come to that number. And I'm projecting out into the future. We know that these are expensive operations to run, and having, quote, that cushion or that reserve, I do think is critically important. And just maybe a quick comment on that if possible.
Thank you, Chair. That is an astute observation. $75,000 is not what the asset management plan requires us to be contributing as far as an increase to close the gap. We are looking at that as a first step and what we think is probably a minimum increase to get us through the next 5 years when we're looking at our capital investments, and again, putting some money away so that we will have funding available if we're successful in grants to make sure we can pay for the capital projects that we have on our 5-year plan. We'll need to do an update of the asset management plan in the next few years. And I know it's on Terry's work plan in the near future to start doing the long-term financial 20-year plans. So it's not an exact figure. It is what we think is probably a reasonable amount to get us through the next 5 years for now.
Great, thank you. If there's no further questions or comments, if someone would like to read out the first motion recommendation that's on the table. Director McEwen.
I will move that the West Coast Committee recommend the Long Beach Airport proposed budget as presented be included in the first reading of the 2023 to 2027 Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Financial Plan bylaw.
If I could have a seconder. Thank you, Director Johnson. Any further questions or comments at this time? I'll call question. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Next up, we'll be talking about the West Coast Emergency Coordination, a proposed service.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this service is a zero tax requisition this year, and our protective services manager is a little unsure about where we're headed. We definitely need some further discussion, mostly on an informal basis with the other emergency programs on the West Coast. However, with the new legislation expected later this spring, we really need to wait and see if our obligations from the province change. So basically just asking to hold the line on this one this year with further discussion to come in 2023, and then in the 2024 budget process, we'll decide if this is a service we would really like to explore, or if we have determined that a more informal meeting approach would be better. And I think that's all.
Any questions from the board, from the committee, sorry? Just a quick comment. Yeah, I'm eagerly awaiting the modernized emergency management legislation, and I look forward to reviewing the options that staff will be bringing forward. I know we're anticipating that here on the West Coast as well. Seeing no questions, if someone would like to, the next motion on the table. Great, thank you. Siga, if you could just read that one out. I don't know if you have it in front of you.
I move that the West Coast Committee recommend the West Coast Emergency Coordination proposed service budget as presented be included in the first reading of the 2023-2027 Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Financial Plan bylaw.
Could I have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you, Director McEwen. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Next on the agenda, the West Coast Multiplex Service.
I'll speak to that one, Chair Steer. So in this category, it's important just to flag that ultimately what the service is geared towards is the operations of a multiplex. So when this was established, it was established with the assumption that the West Coast Multiplex Society would take on the capital construction of the actual structure, and that then this service would then kick in and start the taxation relevant to the operations of the site. At this time, there is no building to operate, so we're not recommending any activities under this service. But I will flag that where we left off last year is having discussions at a local level just to make sure that we were clear on how this ranks as a priority within the West Coast region. At this time, the Society has been a fantastic champion and been working really hard at the developing division of the West Coast Multiplex. But to date, it hasn't been a government-led initiative. And so it's been kind of challenging to get everyone on the same page with the same vision. So last year, where we left off, we had expressed in the dialogue with everyone on the West Coast that they would wait for the election, have a strategic plan review, discuss what their priorities were with regards to recreation, and if this was something that ranked as a strategic priority, that the regional district would set the table for further dialogue to make sure that we could talk about the details of both the location, where this could take place, as well as the details of what would be included, because the scope certainly got wider in terms of arena, pool, and indoor gymnasiums and whatnot. And so at this time, we don't have any activity planned. We're going to wait to hear from both Tofino and Ucluelet, as well as the nations in terms of their strategic priorities around recreation, and then come back to the board with how we would advance this initiative.
Great. I'll look to the committee, and I see Siga has a question. Director Siga, please go ahead.
Thanks. Through Chair Daniel, I am thinking about what you said, and I'm just wondering if the focus of the Multiplex Society is too narrow, and can the speaking from experience of being on a recreational and environmental board, it served a really, really valuable purpose in looking at the whole budget process, decision-making process through those two lenses. And I'm wondering if the Multiplex Society couldn't serve as that sort of lens for the ACRD and sort of expand their focus to recreation and environment.
Oh, sure. Terry's going to answer that.
So I'm just looking at the establishing bylaw for the service, and the service is defined as establish and operate a service for public recreation, including a multiplex facility on the West Coast. So it definitely, it would be hard to expand to an environmental point of view, but as they talked about changing it from like an ice surface to potentially something else, the definition of multiplex does give a little bit of flexibility. But again, it talks about establish and operate a service for public recreation and community use, including a multiplex facility. So definitely a recreation focus.
Any other questions? Director Siga, go ahead.
Sorry, so is there any way to sort of bring them under, in any way, shape, or form, under the umbrella of ACRD governance, and are they interested in that?
Well, the society is its own entity, and so for us to bring that entity into our fold, under the ACRD, we'd have to take a look to see whether or not it would be something that is connected either as a select committee or as some sort of working group working for the ACRD. That would take some work to figure out and would likely need a process whereby we have to create terms of reference and do a call for people to be part of something like a committee. So possible, yes, but we'd have to really give it some thought and have some discussion with the society, because there's advantages to the society in terms of their ability to collect funds, and they would lose that ability, I think, if they gave up their society status. It might be easier for us to consider how we work with them as a society in a more established way. And for that, I think it would really be important to have consensus, particularly from this committee, from all the members of this committee, to talk about what that vision would be for them. And I think there'd be some wisdom to waiting until we hear back from Iqaluit and Tofino and Toquat and Iqaluit and Pauquet in particular, in terms of where this stands for them and what their priorities are. It would be hard for us to coordinate something that our members don't necessarily see as a priority right now. And I might be putting words in people's mouth, and I don't mean to. It's just that we haven't formally heard back from these communities in terms of the larger vision.
And if I could just add to that, we just completed it's not completed, but our strategic planning process was Monday and Tuesday, all day, Monday and Tuesday. So we have had those conversations, and I know that Iqaluit will be having those as well. And the nations, I can't speak for them, but I know in conversation with Tloquit that those conversations are active as well. And Director Siga, in terms of the Multiplex Society themselves, one of their primary functions and roles was to raise the capital for the project, and so it would have to be a very deep conversation within the society themselves as to which direction, if this was of any benefit for them. So if there are no, Director Tucci, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've actually just concluded our strategic plan as well. I think we are in the midst of creating the executive work plan around that 5-year strategic plan, and I don't feel as though any of our immediate priorities kind of fit within this type of multiplex initiative. So I think our strategic plan is posted on our website, but I'll be sure to forward it to the rest of the committee as well, just for information.
Thank you, Director Tucci. I appreciate that. And seeing no further questions, would one of our fine members like to read out the next recommendation? Oh, sorry, Director McEwen. I got to put my glasses on.
I was just offering to read the recommendation.
Wonderful.
So I will move that the West Coast Committee recommend the West Coast Multiplex Service proposed budget as presented be included in the first reading of the 2023 to 2027 Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Financial Plan bylaw.
We have a seconder. Thank you, Director Johnson. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Next one up would be the transit service, West Coast Transit Service, and I see the slides already up. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. As we spoke briefly about as it relates to the airport, we have the proposed West Coast Transit Service. We've been working originally to have this expansion run by BC Transit. We went out and did a service establishment and have been planning to start this service. We've run into some hiccups, first with the COVID and delivery of buses delay, and now BC Transit has not been able to secure funding for their portion of this service. We were notified of this in the fall, and we have started looking at alternative solutions that do not involve BC Transit. We have hired a consultant who is currently working on that, and we expect at the next West Coast Committee meeting to have them come and present the results of their report and study. And they're doing engagement right now. They have a working group, and so we're very much looking forward to seeing what options are going to be available for us to consider for this service. As such, we did drop the tax requisition to 0 for this service because of the unknown outcome, and we'll be able to consider what options we move forward with and what those tax implications are at the next meeting. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
I'll look to the board for any questions. Director McEwen.
Thank you, through the chair to staff. How are we funding Watt Consulting to do this study? Does that not come out of the transit budget?
Through the chair, yes, it does. So because we have requisition monies, as we had anticipated in starting the service significantly earlier, we have money in the reserve. I think we have a surplus of about,
We had surplus of just over $88,000 because we kind of found out during the year that this project wasn't going ahead. So we're using that to fund this work, and it'll also give us some ability to move forward if there's a recommendation that comes out that is viable for us in 2023. We have a couple of options. We have some money sitting in the capital reserve if there's some capital money. And then we had actually developed a stabilization reserve back when it originally got postponed due to COVID. So we have about $85,000 in there as well. So if Watt comes forward with something that's agreeable, then we can start at some point during the year with anticipating increases the following year.
Thank you.
Maybe just to follow up on that particular one with Watts Consulting, there was also, depending on what comes forward, there was the potential ability for Watts to be part of the implementation of whatever recommendation may come forward. And that would be funded through that same allotment, I suspect.
that is correct.
Any further questions from the committee? I just want to comment that, as everyone knows, this has been a long process. And I think Jenny had referred to the hiccup, and that's a technical term for some of the issues that have been going on here. And I'm looking forward to having this service established. It's been clearly identified from the West Coast communities how important it is from a variety of factors. So if someone would kindly like to read the next recommendation, that would be wonderful.
I'll move that the West Coast Committee recommend the West Coast Transit Service proposed budget as presented be included in the first reading of the 2023 to 2027 Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Financial Plan bylaw.
Could I have a seconder? Thank you,
Second.
Director. Are there any further comments or questions? No, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. The last one on the list, one of my favorites, West Coast Committee on the West Coast Waste Management Service.
Yes, and we had a monumental year in 2022 for this because we began organics diversion. So some of the highlights from 2022, it was the expansion of waste collection to the First Nation communities within Tyastanis, Assawista, and Tatsu. And that was an incredible collaboration process that went incredibly well. And really, we're building on those relationships with continuing maintenance through partnership with the First Nations, as well as education within those communities. So that's just been a fantastic expansion of our curbside collection service. And then the rollout, again, another hiccup. We had delay for our cart delivery, but we did end up doing the rollout starting in late November and December. And I am so excited because I looked at the data recently, and in the last 2 years, and we do have a detailed report, I think, later on in the agenda, just giving an update in detail on the program. But I really want to highlight that, you know, in 2 months, we collected over 100 tons of organics. And like of that total, so 45% of the waste is now getting diverted from curbside. This is in the off season. This is just an incredible number. We're going to have a lot of challenges with continuing with the education and when we get a lot of non-residents showing up. So we know we have a lot of work to do to continue with the success, but the data is showing an initial success, which we know because we hear it and see it, that West Coast residents are committed to waste diversion. So we're really excited about that. Which is going to build on one of our big initiatives for 2023, which is going to be updating our solid waste management plan. So the organics diversion was the last big outstanding item on our list from the original solid waste management plan. And now we want to go back and look at that, engage with the community and talk about what are the reaffirming our values, our targets, and what are some initiatives that we can now start to tackle and address waste management on the West Coast. So very exciting stuff when it comes to the waste system there. We're also nearing the end of the commissioning for the new organics processing facility. Right now, we're just doing temporary processing at the landfill. The construction civil works are expected to be done, and we hope to do a big celebration maybe in the weather's a little nicer at the site, because things are looking really good there. And again, this is an excellent upgrade for services for the residents on the West Coast. I've noted here just some of our current goals for the service, which is to reduce waste, to increase diversion, to make sure that we're managing our airspace consumption. And the financial responsibility is a big one for solid waste, because when you run a landfill, we need to make sure that we're operating it not just for now, but well into the future. And the key as well is with our environmental. So we want to make sure that we are treating our leachate, reducing our gas emissions, and everything that we do really works towards those. So as I mentioned, we'll be continuing to focus on our education program for 2023. And doing the solid waste management plan update. It's really master planning is the theme for community services in 2023. Happy to answer any questions.
I'll look to the board if there's any questions on good old waste management. Don't see any. I do have maybe a question. I have lots of comments, but I'll save that for another time in the sake of brevity. The tax as was pointed out in the report, the tax requisition is very stable. And I'm wondering, we did have a tipping fee review, fee review, and I can see that it's in line with the delivery of the service. Is that review, correct me, I can't remember, it was last year, but is that review an ongoing process that is looked at just to make sure that we are staying inappropriate as inflation and all those wonderful things come along? How often do we review those fees?
Thank you, Chair. We're generally keeping on top of it. So the big tipping fee is, of course, the municipal solid waste tipping fee, and that's the one that we all see. But for us, we also try to keep just a tab on what our costs and revenues are for all of the diversion products. So that includes mattresses, styrofoam cardboard. We want to make sure that they're covering their costs and we're not subsidizing them. So we have a few items that we're seeing are starting to shift. And so we are likely going to be coming to the committees and the board to do an update on some of the fees. I know the mattresses one is going to be one of them because basically the costs for recycling them are just edging up a little bit over what we're covering on those. I also anticipate that we're going to take a big look at our tipping fees and make sure that we're good. We kind of do it as part of the financial plan every year because if we're not going to be increasing tax requisition, that is for solid waste, tipping fees, especially the municipal solid waste, is the majority of our revenue for this service and how we fund it. So it is the time that we look at it. And so for this year in particular, we don't anticipate a tipping fee increase in the next 6 months or so. But as we start to move forward, we might be taking a report to the board maybe in late fall for municipal solid waste. And it will probably come to the committee first. So do expect to see that. But for the interim, we're actually sitting pretty good because we have been, I think, very proactive about reviewing the tipping fees. And one of the other benefits that works in our favor is that our neighbors' tipping fees go up, and we like to stay in line with those tipping fees. That in the past have actually probably initiated tipping fee increases earlier than we'd needed them, which has been very helpful because we saw a lot of importing of waste into the Alberni Valley. And so in order to stop that, which it actually did, we just matched our tipping fees. And so that's helped us fund this. But the costs are always increasing. And the good news of diversion is that we're putting less waste into the landfill. The bad news is that the costs go up proportionally. So it's going to become more challenging for us as we become better at waste diversion.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate the feedback. And it is a credit to the ACRD and that long-term planning to keep that stability within that program. And I was just to add on to that last little part, in some ways, I think maybe in the long-term look, financial look at when we are diverting that amount in terms of the longevity of our landfill, there may be a strong argument that in fact, with this wonderful planning and diversion, that we will be saving money in that much longer term. And I don't know, that's speculation on my part. I'm not, I would look to Terry for the answer on that. But anyways, I will move on. And if there's no further questions or comments, if we can move to the recommendation. Thank you, Director McEwen, for reading that out.
I will move that the West Coast Committee recommend the West Coast Waste Management Service proposed budget as presented be included in the first reading of the 2023 to 2027 Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District Financial Plan bylaw.
And seconded by, thank you, Director Siga. I'll call the question. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Moving on to our next agenda item, we got the big one taken care of. The money is going hopefully in the right place. We'll have a request for decision now regarding the Long Beach Airport lease preliminary application file, and this is through Source Holdings. And Jenny, I see, has come up on screen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so just as a reminder, we have recently established a two-step approval process for lease applications. In the last few years, we've seen significant increase in interest in people getting leases at the airport to do various activities. So what we've set up is the preliminary approval, which is a $500 fee and a conceptual idea of what's planned for a lease lot, comes to the committee, it's reviewed at committee. If it's approved in concept, then we start to get into the details of what a lease actually looks like, what will be the fees, and we work with the leaseholder to come up with a much more detailed lease application, review with First Nations, and then we take that to the board. So we have, I think, two on the agenda today. The first one is from Source Holdings, Chris Cowan. And the lease concept is for something that looks like a hangar with a loft included. And this would be multiple lease lot developments. So you'd have development that consists of a number of these residential / plane storage units. It's an interesting, I guess you would call it almost an airplane B&B idea. And it's creative. It may be a good use of land at the airport, and it's a very interesting proposal. The challenge at this point, though, for us from staff perspective, is that we don't have, we're very limited on airside lease lots as it is. And although this is air related activity, it's also more the housing, and it's a very interesting concept. It wouldn't currently be supported by the land use management plan that we set out in 2007. But again, we know that's outdated, and maybe that doesn't reflect the vision of what the community is looking for. So we think that although this is an interesting application, that it's really important that we actually engage with the community and with all of our stakeholders and partners to find out what the vision is and if this fits within it before we approve proceeding with this. And in order to, I think, best manage applicant expectations, the recommendation from staff is to defer this application. So not to say no, but to say, yes, we'd like to look at this when we have the updated land use management plan in place. And also, I think that this would be an interesting thing. It's something we will be able to consider as we're updating the plan, because it's good to hear what different people have as ideas or what different development potential is. So I think it's nice and it's good that we have this in our hands, and the recommendation from staff is to defer until we have a land use management plan. Happy to answer any other questions.
Great. Now I look to the board and I see already Director Siga. Go ahead, please.
My first take on this was, oh boy, we're creating more high-end accommodations when there are already many high-end accommodations within the West Coast area. And I sort of saw it as really elitist. What you've just said gives me a different perspective, and now I have to think again.
Wonderful. Any other questions for staff? I just wanted to comment quickly. I very much support the recommendation. I had a number of questions regarding this project, and I think it really points to the aspect of the work we need to do on that long-term planning and that consultation and engagement with Tloquet First Nations on the use of the lands within these territories. So I'm very much looking forward to that process going through, and very much support the recommendation here for deferral. So I'll look to, if there are no further questions or comment, I'll look to one of our board members to read the recommendation. Or I could take my turn. I'll read out the West Coast Committee defers the preliminary lease application LBA 2023-002 from Chris Cowan, Source Holding Limited, to a future committee meeting following the completion of the Long Beach Airport Land Use and Development Plan. And could I have a seconder? Thank you, Director Siga. Are any other comments regarding the application? Director McEwen, go ahead, please.
Yes, just wondering if I will read out is the same as move, because we had this discussion at our council meeting last week. A councillor said, I recommend, and read out the motion. And our parliamentarian said that doesn't fly. You have to say, I move.
Roger, I will correct that if that is the case. I'll look to Wendy just for clarification, but I will, if the board will, it had been seconded. I'll look to Wendy quickly for comment, and then if necessary, I can say I move.
Yeah, moved is probably the correct way for sure. So I've got moved by Director Steer, seconded by Director Siga.
Roger, copy. Yeah. Sometimes I have to be careful of what I say or not say. So we have it moved and seconded. Thank you for any other comment on the Director Siga. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I would just like to, I think that this is an opportunity for local people to access businesses and create a local economy, a stronger local economy. So if the board can, is it allowable that they present whether the person lives locally or not when a proposal is brought forward?
I will look to staff. There we go.
Yeah, through the chair, we do. So I guess actually on our application form, each applicant puts in their address and they, they have that interest. We can add a section in there to encourage them to explain what their connection with the community is, whether they live locally. We can absolutely do that. The preliminary application is very brief in order to, again, just go, yes, should we or shouldn't we move forward? And I'll review the formal application because I think that's where it would probably better fit. And we can look and see if we want to add in a section just to give them opportunity to speak to the local connection. I think that aligns really well with some of our, our initiatives moving forward with social procurement. So thank you. We will move on that on a staff level.
Wonderful. Any other comment from the board? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. We have another lease application, and I'm going to suspect Jenny will be speaking to this one as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have a second lease application. This is from Charlie Cornish. The application is for a mobile studio for local musicians to use for rehearsals, practice, recording, and music lessons. The mobile unit is proposed just to have power servicing, which would require a DC hydro service to the site and a drop. And what hasn't been proposed, but if this is approved by the committee, we will work with the applicant on, is just washroom facilities and capacity on site. We see that as being necessary, but otherwise, with a 3-year lease, there is no guarantee for an extension, and that is the majority of our leases on site are all short-term 3-year leases. We are being very clear up front with people who are getting short-term leases to explain that we are in the process of updating our land use management plan, and that may or may not include or support their current activities. So there is no guarantee that they will get an extension of their lease. That's very clear. And when we're getting applications that don't put in any permanent foundations, are easily moved, we see it as a very low risk to have frustration in the future if they do have to be relocated to a different location, or that the lease itself is no longer renewed or extended for them. For those reasons, we do not see any big concerns with this application. So we are recommending to the committee that they support this, and we move into working with the applicant to put together a formal application. Happy to answer any questions.
I'll look to the board if there are any questions of staff. Director Tucci, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Just in terms of process, I'm not familiar with the actual lease applications. I'm wondering how a proponent or a leasee is required or requested to provide, I guess, results of engagement with Oakwood First Nation or any of the other nations where these leases are in the territory of. I know in the summary that was provided, it does say they plan to engage with Colquitt, but I'm just curious about process on how that works.
Through the chair, excellent question. I'm happy to give an overview of that. For short-term leases, for a long-term lease, if it's a registered long-term lease, there is a provincial requirement for consultation, and it is through a process that the province itself actually regulates. To date, luckily we haven't had that much interest, but we didn't have a formal process set up. So we're actually in the process of working on that. It's related to our memorandum of understanding and coming up with a better lease review process. With that being said, on Friday, we had a meeting to talk about the MOU. We also discussed both of these, and we discussed what is the system that we want to use for moving forward. Because technically the ACRD is the landowner and we're doing the leasing, it is the ACRD that should be doing the review with the First Nation. So what our process is going to be is that the short-term application comes in, we take it to the committee to see if we should spend any time at all on this or not. And if we should, then we will be reviewing this with the Colquitt. We're looking to have meetings set up quarterly, which would align well with sort of our process review and approval. And then we'll take the applications once they've been fleshed out a bit, talk with them, see if they're happy. And I think it's key because, again, the land use management plan is going to be so helpful for us on a staff level because we'll have had locally on board, we're all in the same place and we have a vision moving forward. And it feels like we don't right now. And so each and every one, we want to be very clear and considerate is this what we want to do? And what are we doing moving forward? So I really appreciate the question because it's an important consideration for ourselves. So with this one in particular, if the committee reviews and approves it, we have talked with them, they don't have concerns, we know that already, but technically we'll be going back to them again with the completed formal lease application before we bring it to the board. And in that report, we'll be telling the board as well that we have engaged and that there is support. So thank you.
Any further questions from the board? If someone would like, Director Siga, go ahead, please.
Again, I'm just wondering if this person lives locally.
I actually think in this case, they did state that in their proposal. So I do happen to know that this one in particular is a local resident and sounds like a musician.
Great. Director McEwen, go ahead, please.
I will move that the West Coast Committee supports the preliminary lease application LBA-2023-003 from Charlie Cornish and recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors consider approval of the final application.
Seconded by Director Siga. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. So we're now down into our reports, and I see we have a few members, our ex officio members, and I will, as it's laid out here, we can look to the Pacific Rim National Park, and I see Ms. Amat. If you would like, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for the committee for the invitation. So hello, everyone. My name is Jacinthe Amiot. I go by Jazz. I'm the Resource Conservation Manager here at Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, and I'm sitting in for Dave Toval, Acting Superintendent, who is currently in business in Ottawa. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I'll provide some pointers, some brief updates, and also happy to take any questions and follow-ups if I don't have the answer right away for you. So without further ado, Comer's Dog Band. So this is an initiative, a pilot that we initiated last year at Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, where basically every dog is prohibited in Comers as a means to conservation for shorebird population. So we analyzed our reports and our data for last year, and we had an increase in shorebird by 32%. We also had compliance by folks, the local population and visitors by 97%. So very successful pilot so far. This is year one out of, I would say, at least three to five to really have some significance demonstrated over time. So again, this will happen April 1 this year, and it ends on October 1st. So it's a seasonal band. And in terms of where we're looking at, it's really on the north ends, it's Sandale Creek, and it ends just before Greenpoint Campground in terms of like the entire beach area. So again, a whole lot of success that we're happy to report on. I want to also update on the Wild About Wolves projects. So this is it was 4 years, it's been extended by an extra year to try to reestablish some balance between humans and the wolf population on the Long Beach unit, but also in other areas in the park reserve. So it's our last year. The upcoming fiscal is the last year of the project. So we are expecting a final report to be shared and perhaps some celebrations. We're still very much in the planning for this. Just a couple of updates. We are preparing to basically deliver a trappers course between Beach Keepers Guardian and Parks Canada staff. This is the official BC trappers course that's delivered by a contractor, as also a means to have staff working together and build capacity on how to share data moving forward, perhaps into the future. There's also an elders meeting group happening next week. Also, we are making sure that we are staying on the right track with having the elders really guiding this project from the very beginning. So this is kind of the works ongoing. We're starting to receive some really good information on some of the SCAT analysis on the wolves that, you know, the scats that have been collected. So it's just initial right now, but we're really starting to see a portrait of the families and the diets. And so really good information that will be able to come up, and also for just education purposes moving forward. Maybe I'll stop there, but maybe just a link with the airport fence. So we're also monitoring for enhanced deer strikes. So more to come on that. If it does come up, we'll want to share some updates if it comes up. But we are monitoring this change in pattern for wildlife and what that could mean. Maybe I'll just end on some visitation updates. So we do have a new national office is dealing with the new visitation booking site. So that's happening live on March 13. If you go on the website, there's also, we're asking visitors to pre-register on this new platform ahead of time, so that when they come in, they can just go ahead and make their bookings, whether it's for Greenpoint or the Broken Group for this year. So maybe I'll just stop here. I probably said a lot. So again, any questions are welcome, and potential feedback. Thank you so much.
I'll look to the board. I have a few, so I'll look to the board if there's anything first. Director McEwen, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair to Jazz. Can you explain what a trapping course is?
Absolutely. So the BC Trappers Association has a formal course being delivered to human wildlife coexistence and conservation officers type, but also guardians and First Nations who are interested in that course. It really goes, I'm not familiar, I'm not a trapper myself, but it's definitely the way to sort of make sure we, in a humane way, collect specimens, whether it's through actual trapping of all kinds of different mammals. So this isn't specific to wolves per se, but it is a very well-known technique for wildlife management, wildlife biology, and field work type skill sets that are I would say, guided by some best practice principles that we want to follow, again, in participation with the nation to make sure that they were interested. So this was a broad invitation, and the partners said, yes, this is recognized as a skill set that they wanted. So we pursued that. But I can also follow up with the contractor and submit maybe the protocols that they have if this is of interest.
Thank you. We'll look to the rest of the board or committee. Sorry, I keep saying board. Well, thank you, Jez. I have a couple questions just on the Wild About Wolves program, and I did work in the early 80s trapping wolves for research in northern Minnesota, so I'm quite familiar with it and quite intrigued by what's going on. But I will just a quick request. You were mentioning that the funding for the Wild About Wolves, this was ending this fiscal year. Is there an application for further funding? Because I think it's a very successful program, and I'm just curious if there is an application in for further funding.
So just to clarify, there's one more fiscal year, so that we're still okay. In it. But then there's another year, so it's ending March 2024. So we do have another year. Okay. And I think part of the outcome for this year or this upcoming fiscal will really be to look at what's next, whether or not we'll have another application. That's really depending on all the partners. So something to consider too is Wild About Wolves was seen nationally by Parks Canada as best practice, like, wow, you've developed this project with the partners. And so we're like, yep, that's kind of how we want to do business and how we should be doing business. So because it's had such a light on the success of the project, I suspect there will be appetite to continue. But again, more to come on that.
And then just a quick one on the shorebirds. You had mentioned a 32% increase, and I'm wondering, is that across all? Was that across all species, or was that just a generalized increase of 32%, or did you see it in specific species within those shorebird populations?
Yeah, this is where I would definitely want to pull my ecologist for getting that. I can absolutely follow up on that. The 32% represents all shorebirds that were observed. So that's an aggregated data point, but guarantee if I talk to Ian Cruikshank or Yuri or others would be able to give you lots of details on which species were observed. I don't have that information, but happy to follow up.
I'll call Ian directly. Thanks.
Sounds great.
And then just the last one on the deer movements around the airport. My son has got 3 years of excellent data on the movement of deer around airport lands and the golf course area. So if you ever want that information, reach out. Great. Thank you very much for your report and update. It's very much appreciated. I'll look to see, and I can't see my participant panel, if there are any members from Howsett First Nation with us today. I can't see all the participants, so.
Mr. Chair, I do not see any participants from Howsett today.
Thank you, Wendy. Next would Tloquet First Nations, and again, I cannot see everyone on here. And if there is someone from Tloquet, please jump in if I don't see you on here. And not seeing anyone jump up, I'll look to Heshquit and I do not see anyone on my panel, but if not, there's an opportunity. Seeing none, I'll move, if someone would like to, well, I'll move from the chair that the West Coast Committee receive the verbal reports. Thank you, Director Siga, for seconding. All in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Great. Now we just have some reports for information, and there's a few here. Was there any reports that the board members would like to pull out to discuss? Seeing none, I don't, there's not a recommended motion to receive, so I'll move on to late business. And on the agenda for late business, as was added in the agenda, I did want to bring forward a notice of motion, and this has come up, and I'm gonna look to our CAO to give some background and information about particularly why about the substance of the motion, and I can read it out, that the West Coast Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors direct staff to develop a plan for advancing inclusive governance within the formal board governance structures of the ACRD in 2023. And I apologize for not having the ability to have, and there it is. Thank you, having it posted there. He read my mind, so that you can actually see it in text format. And I will look to our CAO, if Daniel, if you wouldn't mind giving maybe a bit of background and some context for why this may be coming up at this time.
Thank you, Chair. This is something that has been part of our strategic plan ever since its development, and it's an issue that we do struggle with, because under the current provincial legislation, it's only treaty nations who have the ability to opt in and take part in our actual governance structure. And the gap that presents is that not every nation is choosing the path of treaty, and in fact, what we're seeing is that there are different paths that need to be acknowledged. And under UNDRIP and DRIPA, we really want to make sure that we are representing all nations, because all voices are important. And the regional district is really a good forum, we feel, for having all voices and talking about issues and elements and services that directly impact the day-to-day lives of people living in the region. Last year, we did have the opportunity to speak to the province at UBCM. We did ask for funding, and we're still waiting to hear on that, because the funding would allow us to at least set a table for dialogue and talk about how it is that we can create change within our own system, and where it is that the province could support us with effective provincial legislation, so that we can have a more comprehensive and more complete board. There again, we're also talking about the opt-in. We don't want to be heavy-handed, and there may be some nations that don't either they're not ready or don't currently see the value, whatever the reason. We don't want to be forcing anyone to the table who doesn't want to be at the table, but we do at least want to have the vehicle for allowing those who do want to partake to do so in a meaningful way. And when we say meaningful, we do say, to have a vote that actually adds to the direction of where we're going. We have the ex officio now, as we see with the West Coast, which is great. We appreciate that, but there's a very important difference between the ability to vote on what we're doing as opposed to simply listening in and contributing in a verbal way. If there's any questions, I'll gladly answer them.
Look to the board to see if there's any questions at this point. This will be a recommendation to go to the board, the ACRD board, and there will be an opportunity at that point if there are, this is kind of quickly been put onto the table, and this, if the committee would like to move this forward, that there will be a time for background and maybe more in-depth conversation at the board level. So with that being said, I can read the motion here, if that would be acceptable to the board. Great. That the West Coast Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors direct staff to develop a plan for advancing inclusive governance within the formal board governance structures of the ACRD in 2023. Seconded by Director McEwen. Any other comment at this point? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Thank you. I will look to the board, or to Wendy, to see if there are any questions coming from our wonderful public.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are no questions or comments from the public respecting the meeting today.
Well, thank you kindly. At this time, we do have an in-camera agenda. And so there are reasons why we go into in-camera agenda, and I will read those out in this particular case. That the motion to close the meeting to the public as per the Community Charter sections 91-J, information that is prohibited or information that if it were presented in a document would be prohibited from disclosure under section 21 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And second, 21-1A to II of FOIPA, the head of a public body must refuse to disclose to an applicant information that would reveal commercial, financial, labor relations, scientific or technical information of or about a third party, and .. 21-CI of FOIPA, the disclosure of which could reasonably be expected to harm significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the negotiating position of the third party. I have a seconded. Thank you, Director McEwen. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, a motion